On this episode of A State of Control, we talk about learning resources for AV. How do you learn about developing your skills? How do new people get into the industry? And what are some people in the industry doing to help that? All this and more on A State of Control.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A State of Control.
A State of Control, episode 31, Reach One, Teach One, recorded January 26, 2017. A State of Control is brought to you by the fine underwriters of AVNation, companies like Atlas IED.
This is A State of Control.
Welcome to A State of Control, AVNation podcast that highlights the control, automation, and programming aspects of the audiovisual industry. I'm your host, Steve Greenblatt. Thanks for joining us today. We have another exciting episode planned, and of course I'll say that every episode, but I think that this one's kind of special. We're going to talk about the importance of learning and how to find the education that you need to both sustain and grow as an AV professional, as well as ways to give people opportunity to get into the industry. So with me to speak about such topics are a few panelists. Two of them you know, and one is new. First, I'll introduce our old friend who wasn't able to be with us last month, Rich Fergoza. How are you today, Rich?
Good. Everybody's favorite Uncle Richie. Mellow West Coast greetings. I'm glad to be here. I'm still a little under the weather, but I'm a gamer, making sure I'm in. Very
cool. We're glad to have you back. Next is a frequent guest of the show, our friend from Germany, Patrick Murray from Control House. How are you today, Pat?
I'm good, Steve. Guten Tag. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Hanging in there.
And lastly is a newcomer, but I think he's going to fit in quite well, and we're going to treat him as such. His name is Dustin Berg. He's from Pro AV School and Dynamark Media. How are you today, Dustin?
Hi, glad to be here. Thanks for bringing me on the show.
You're welcome. Glad to have you. So between the increasing demands in the industry, the rate that technology changes, and the lack of real formal education for being able to get into AV, I feel like there's you have to really kind of get creative to be able to learn and grow in this industry. So we're going to talk about some different ways that and different resources that are available. But I kind of want to first start by trying to get a feel for how does everybody currently learn, and what are some ways of how have you personally learned, and what are different ways to be able to grow in this industry? And Rich, so I'll start with you. You and I have been doing this for quite some time. And aside from learning, as you go and by making mistakes, are there any tricks that you could share or any successes that you've had?
Well, I think that in our industry, we've talked about it so many times, is that it's not just about code. There is a whole lot that you're dealing with, not only your control system, but being fluent in everything else that's down the road from the unit, and especially in residential. We found that we've become de facto experts in lighting and climate control and pool control systems and motorized gate systems and security systems. And so I think what I've found more than anything else is you've got to have a willingness to research not just what your specific manufacturers that you're working with and your overall code base, but you have to spend a whole lot of time understanding the nuances of the subsystems that you're controlling. And I think once you get a good grounding in that, it tends to make your life a whole lot easier because you know what to expect and you can deal with it appropriately. But as for me, it's I went to film school. I didn't see this one coming, and I originally started out from the design side of things. And the control system programming for me was an extension of focusing on the human experience, on the user interface side of things. And I think that that's something that we do want to focus on as well. And when you're thinking about it, is not getting caught up necessarily in the gadgetry of what we do, but always making sure is what we're delivering, something that normal people are going to be able to interact with.
Sure, I think you bring up a good point, and I think, especially when you're talking about programming, what you have to learn, the code is probably one of the smaller parts. It's learning all the other things, as well as learning how to just deal with the situations that you're put in. So Pat, when you approach learning, or if you were to give advice to somebody who's trying to make it in this industry, knowing that there's plenty of opportunity, where would you steer them in terms of being able to break in? Because these days, the systems that we do are a lot more complex than they used to be.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I've been thinking about this question since you sent us the outline yesterday. And I think looking back on my career, one of the most important things was having mentors. So I worked for a lot of different small companies and a few larger companies. And in the smaller companies, it was always people who wanted to get things off their plate, who took their time with me. Really, I remember looking at a touch panel the first time. I didn't know, what does this thing do? And somebody had the patience to explain it to me. And eventually I went to manufacturer's training, and that's how I got started with programming. But I started pulling cable and fabricating cables and racks and things like that. And there was always this kind of mentorship, you included, when I worked for you as well, with the control specification and actually putting on paper what that button does. I think that's a real important part. But I think in the larger companies, that's a lot more difficult to have that kind of a small family atmosphere where everybody is helpful. There's a lot more politics involved. But larger companies also have processes, which could be a huge strength. So if you could start somebody out with really small tasks, maybe cutting cable and then fabricating the cable and then building the rack and then testing the rack. So really make it small pieces and just build up over time. And eventually you'll have this overview like Rich was talking about, of understanding all the subsystems. And then if you have a coding background, or if you're new to coding, you could jump into that and know how you're going to apply it, because that's the most important part when you sit down to write a program, is to know where you're going.
Absolutely. I think that's always been a challenge, in the fact that if you don't really have that blueprint, and and it kind of comes back to the whole scope of work discussion that we tend to have a lot too, that if you don't have that blueprint to write a program, how do you know what it is that you're doing, and how do you know that you've accomplished it?
Exactly. Otherwise you're just guessing. I think it should work like this.
So Dustin, you and I had a chat recently where you were talking about training a new employee. Where do you start? Like, because I've had some struggles with this, and you can rely on the manufacturer's training, but it just seems like there's just a lot of gaps, and you may learn fundamentals, but the application is really where the value is. And I haven't seen many ways of being able to learn that aside from doing.
Yeah, well, so I brought on a junior guy who's got a lot of experience with code type stuff. He's actually pretty well versed in C#, which, as most people know, is how simple Sharp is derived from, in a sense. But he didn't really have that much experience with programming Crestron. So sort of what everybody was saying, like mentorship and stuff, with him, I've been doing a lot of showing him. Like, it's been about 6 months, I would say, for him to be able to start actually taking things and making them happen, instead of kind of sucking my time to help, because I got to slow down to show him what I'm doing and help him learn with the grand vision. Like, you got to kind of have that grand vision that eventually he's going to be able to do what I'm doing, and I can do something else or work on something else. But it takes a while to get there. So I think like mentorship is kind of the only way to get from sort of newbie to having some level of experience. Like the on-site training and stuff, it's a few days. It's just like, if you're not in the right spot to learn what you need to learn, it's just like, it's over your head, you're gone, and you're looking at it 6 months later, like, how did we do that again? I think I've seen it. So I've kind of developed some training to kind of sort of take that mentor experience and put it into like a online format that people can kind of refer to, and we could probably talk about that as we continue on a bit.
Sure.
I think this mentor thing came up again is really interesting, and it doesn't need to be some kind of official apprenticeship program. It could be just a few people sitting at a table fabricating cable together, because there'll generally be some people who are more experienced than others. So just a typical workspace where you have 4 or 5, or even just more than one person working together, that is a form of mentorship, even if it is just for a few minutes saying, hey, you know, you can do that a lot faster this way. And over time, those things really add up.
There's kind of a big precursor to that, I guess, for the people that are learning as well, is they have to have a level of curiosity and interest in what they're learning. Otherwise, it's not really going to work regardless of what technique you use.
Absolutely.
Like, they have to kind of pull themselves along a bit, ask some questions that they're struggling with.
I think people who wind up in AV have a general curiosity about how things work.
Absolutely.
So, Rich, I'll bring you into this conversation. You know, of course, mentoring somebody who works for you is one thing, but when you're working with other people, or if you're working on your own, do you feel like our industry lends itself to people trying to help each other out in terms of transferring knowledge and skills, or do you think that it's more that there are more defined lines and kind of a competition or a competitive advantage that stands between that?
I think that as a whole, the programming community is kind of communal by nature. Right? It's just by nature, I think we share information. That's just kind of our base DNA, at least most of the individuals who I interact with. I love collaboration. I love the fact that I can work on a project, and the reality is that there's some things I'm really, really good at. There's some things that are not my strong suit, and if I can work with somebody and we can both get something out of it, and my feeling has always been from a business approach is that you get more people in there, you're all going to eat, if you do it right. I do know there are some companies who have a little bit of a gag order in terms of, disseminating information or talking about projects. And, that's their right as a business. But I find that to be the exception to the rule. I know in recent years, we've seen a proliferation of kind of user groups. We've all been part of it, in the computer industry, and whether you were online as a kid, or in the old days, there used to be the BBSs, the bulletin board services. I mean, that's why I go back to a 300 baud modem, and typing in, and my first experience interacting with people across the world and sharing information that way. And so we've seen an extension from it. I know there's Facebook groups, there's Yahoo groups, there's I guess Slack, a couple of Slack groups have opened up. So what's changed is that, we're not constrained by proximity. You don't have to be in a room to mentor somebody. You don't have to be in that boardroom with somebody, or, on the residence. Because typically on the job learning doesn't go well a lot of times in our industry, because we're just under just serious deadlines, and half the time you just don't want the guys getting in the way. I agree with what Justin was saying, which was, look, there's a time and there's a place for it, and also fresh ideas. I'm getting closer to 50 than I am 40, and there's some really, really bright kids and great ideas coming up, and new ways of looking at things that my generation, I've just done it differently, so many different ways, that now I have to open myself up and embrace that and say, hey, these guys are bringing something that, a perfect example is somebody who's much more fluent in C# is going to bring a different view of how and why something should be done, as opposed to where my filter has been looking at it. So, again, I think that the technology is how we make our living. And so I'm a big believer in using that. And I do that. I love the forums. I love maintaining conversations. I use Twitter a lot. I mean, a lot of the integrators that I've worked with, new integrators I've worked with over the past 5 years, a lot of them started out with, literally just pitching in. Somebody was in a bind. And, for no other reason than just to pass it back. And, there's my West Coast 5 thing again. But, sending that positive karma out, it comes back. And so, and that's kind of the way that I view it, is that I think just that, we're predisposed to want to share what we do because we're geeks in that area.
Sure. I think you bring up a lot of good points too, as far as the forums and the Facebook groups. And and the Yahoo group has certainly been strong for many years. And I think a lot of that is a good example of how the informal methods of learning and being and collaborating have really been sustainable. So Dustin, we'll kind of pull back the curtain a little bit. You had given us a little bit of preview. Both you and Pat have invested in providing some learning opportunities for the industry. So what was your motivation for that?
I think it's very challenging to get into the industry, and even when you're in it, it's challenging to kind of get trained up, essentially. Like, I think there's kind of a big barrier to entry, even if you work for an integrator, to kind of go from the guy on the street to working for the company to all of a sudden taking programming training and getting kind of down that track. And I think a lot of people kind of see that as kind of the elite, because you don't have to deal with all the messy stuff. But as we know as programmers, we deal with more problems for longer. And it's not necessarily that you're getting away from messiness, but I think that it's hard because there's an investment that the company has to make, even if it's just the time that it takes, because you're hired to do something. And if you want to do something else, you need to be able to, they need to validate that you're going to make use of the training. And so what I've kind of done is started a couple of years ago, I guess I started doing some YouTube videos, just showing different things about programming. And I know like simple Windows and stuff, it's something that's protected pretty closely by Crestron. And a lot of people will try to get it and do their own stuff. My purpose is not for that. It's more for like, here's how it looks. This is kind of what it is. If you want to know more, then here's something you can start kind of getting your head wrapped around, because it's sort of this huge barrier that you need to have an account set up and get the software to even see what the heck it is. And my experience is mostly with Crestron Simple Windows, just to kind of preface that.
Sure. So are you targeting programmers that are curious, or even just AV people who are curious, or programmers that are starting out, or where are you headed with it?
Right. So I kind of went in a couple directions there. It's more, what I'm doing is I've actually created a course that goes through kind of building a project from start to finish, sort of a basic project. And this is how I would approach everything. And I kind of go step by step in a number of videos. It's about 7 hours worth of videos. Kind of boring, I guess, but you can watch it in steps and stuff.
Yeah.
But kind of like sort of peek over somebody's shoulder, see how did you do that? Because I find when I watch somebody else work, it always kind of triggers something. Oh, that's interesting that you did it that way. I'd never thought of doing it that way. So it kind of inspires that kind of stuff too. And it's more targeted towards people that have, they've taken maybe level 1 training, maybe level 2, but they're not really full-time programming. So they want to get to full-time programming, but they're still pulled in many directions. And then they get thrown a programming job and they're like, oh no, how do you do this again? And there's a guy that's in my class right now. That's exactly his profile. Like he called me and he's trying to do this job. And I'm like, you got kind of the basics, but you're missing a whole bunch of experience of like how things are supposed to talk to each other. And so this is where it would help him to have somewhere to, like, at night go on to watch a video and say, okay, how did you hook up that panel? How do you get that panel to talk? Because this stuff isn't really documented that well. Like you need to kind of have a lot of experience with it to be able to just throw things together and make it work.
Sure. So Pat, I'll throw it to you. Obviously, and I know that you kind of have a similar offering in terms of developing tools and resources for somebody that's learning programming. Your target is a little bit different than Dustin's, but that's a lot of work. What motivated you to go down this path, and how do you see this being received by the industry, and what does the future look like for you?
Well, there's a few points that I need to make here. So whenever you teach something, you get better at it. It forces you to think about it, so your understanding of it improves automatically. But more importantly, I spent a lot of time working with iOS and Swift, making apps. And I also worked on some desktop applications using Node.js. And then I went back to using our old AV programming tools. And it was really frustrating. So I've seen the other side, right? I've seen the light. And it's hard to go back. And it's kind of like, I know all these other programmers who are, right, so much smarter than me. They're talented, they're working hard, and they just don't know about the benefits of these tools. You really have to experience it first, because you have all of these years of modules developed and your ways of doing things. You could program in simple Windows blindfolded, most of these guys out there. So give me a reason to switch. Until you actually sit down and start using it, you don't have that reason. So I was going through it anyway because I wanted it. So that's why I went through the pain of recording all the videos and figuring it out for myself anyway. And it's kind of like when you hear a new song and you want your friends to hear it, just share it. You want everybody to join it anyway. And the other part is there's going to be an API for everything eventually. I don't know when. It could take a really long time. But right now, internet services, there are APIs for Google Maps or whatever. But I really think that the equipment in your rack will just have an API. And we won't be messing around with RS-232. At least that's what I hope for someday. And you just can't do things like that with the old tools. So we're going to be forced eventually to use these tools anyway. And they are there and they work. It does work. I use it in projects. I know of other programming companies that have moved all of their development to Simple Sharp Pro. And I just see no reason not to dip your toe in the water and get started. There was something else I wanted to say, but I lost the thought for now.
That's okay. We'll come back to you. So Rich, as a potential consumer here, where do you see this fitting into either your growth and knowledge as an AV professional, or somebody that you're looking to help grow?
Well, again, it just comes back to knowledge. It comes back to opportunity, and I'm all for it. I mean, it's the reason why I think if you have any business in the residential side of the industry, you should be at CEDIA. You should be at the trainings. Again, it's part of that association. If you're on the commercial side, absolutely, you should be at InfoComm. You should be at the meetings. You should be you should be taking part in the panelist groups, and you should be building that network. I think what it does more than anything else is we're still a community, and we're a small community. And I think that by Dustin and Patrick providing tools and reaching out, it lends a face to the information. And we just by nature, we're going to be a lot more comfortable sharing information or reaching out if we feel we at least know that person in some way. And I think that that's where there is a need as a programming group to really nurture that, to really promote that, to show that, hey, you're not the only guy that's been sitting out there with a laptop sitting on a paint can, trying to get someplace up and running. I mean, it's a very solitary thing that we do at times. And And we can forget that there's a bunch of other people out there who are going through the same thing. And so I think that this just is another way to give people, like you said, to build that curiosity. And I think Dustin made a really good point, is that you have to satisfy the curiosity as well. You can't just be forever curious. There has to be something at the end or something to reach towards. And I think that these tools and the videos, and Pat made a great video. I guess it was about a month and a half ago. You made one of your little instructional video that you did.
About the interlock.
Yeah.
Yeah, the response was great. That's why I made a course out of it.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, just that one little snippet, I was like, that was brilliant. It was just walking along and going, here's how I did it. And what it brought back for me was, sitting down with guys who my proteges who have gone on and done some really great things in the industry. But I remember sitting in a room and going, okay, here's how we're going to do it. And walking through step by step with the screen and watching and monitoring and bringing it through. Or, I've worked with integrators at other times, and I was talking about it the other day. It reminded me of I had an opportunity to work with a couple of other programming companies on a project. The timelines were so tight, we all had to take different parts. And there happened to be a junior programmer there, and he was kind of asking why. And I went, and ironically enough, to finish the project, I went, stop. And I literally put on a kind of an object-oriented programming 101 crash course in the middle of their boardroom with the whiteboard and going, here's why you're getting from here to here. Here is the thought process that we're going through. And I still get calls from this guy, a couple of years later, and it's taking that extra step. And here we go again, giving back into good karma. But I think from a business standpoint, you generate more business out of that generosity and that willingness to give back than you ever do just take.
So following up on that point, do you guys I'll go around with this. Do you think that there's also value in people doing things a certain way and building commonalities and building best practices? I think knowledge and understanding of the topics, because so personally, what intrigues me a lot about this is that I think I mentioned in the open that it's hard to bring somebody up to speed, and whether they're learning a new platform or whether they're coming in and they're new to programming in general. But learning how to do it is not the only important part. It's learning how to do it in a way that is going to be, I guess, an industry, dare I say, standard. Pat, do you envision that providing resources is going to allow people to work better together because they're all learning to do things in a similar manner?
Well, I think it's important to just start off with, we do custom programming. So you need to do what's right for your project. Mm-hmm. But aside from that, I heard an interview with Steve Jobs once, and he was arguing that programming should be a liberal art because it requires you to think. And I think that's the most important part about discussing any kind of standards or way of doing things. It just forces us to think. And if we're thinking in a group, then it just improves everybody in the room. Even if you decide not to do it that way, you've hashed out why you would do it that way, and you have that use case kind of in your head. Like right now, we all have to figure out if we're going to move. I mean, I think this panel here is tilted towards Crestron a bit, so we'll just keep mentioning Simple Sharp Pro. If you're going to start using that, well, the first thing you have to deal with is, how do I deal with all these join numbers? Do I say if join number one, else join number two, else? And we're all dealing with that exactly same thing. It's really ugly to do that. And we're all need to figure out our own way to deal with that. But the more we talk about it, yeah, there will be some standards that come out of it. But in the end, you have a standard in your company. Maybe there will be some kind of programming style guide that we come up with as an AV industry. That would be really interesting. But I would hate to see it in spec in a project where you have to do it that way. Unless of course it's a big rollout where there are teams working across a larger region, for example. But then you would write a style guide for that project. So sure. I think hashing these things out, just the thinking about it, is really useful.
we actually had just to kind of tie in a past episode, but we actually had done a 2-part show on the importance of knowing what's under the hood and writing good quality code, and so that's another discussion. But I think it's something that's worth considering, and
Sure.
being told how to do it is probably not something that's going to fly, but having certain standards or certain quality requirements, I think, is what's important.
Well, there are programming concepts that when you see them, you can recognize them. They have a name, and you see it and you recognize it. Oh, that's done this way. So we could fall back on that and kind of start taking those things, because what we do is unique. It's not web programming. We're dealing with real world devices. So we do need to do it to adjust things for our industry.
So Dustin, one thing that's curious to me is how do you balance keeping up with doing training and providing these types of resources, as well as being the guy out there doing projects?
Yeah, that's something I haven't quite figured out yet. I benefited from a couple of slow months to spend a bunch of time working on kind of putting together the first course. I'm still kind of finishing it off. I got a couple more videos I need to record. But yeah, that's tough, because when it gets busy in AV, it's like the world rains down on you and everybody wants everything. And that's like the problem with AV, and the problem with programming AV that I found is AV is the last trade in, and programming is the last part of the AV trade. And it's just, we're there like hours before they want to like turn over the room. And it's just like, you can't do it that way, but I don't know. So anyways, it's challenging, definitely. But I think kind of like Patrick alluded to, is if you have stuff that like it helps you learn as you're doing the training. So some of the stuff that I'm working on in real life helps me to put kind of different ideas into the training. And that's also a good point to touch on, like theoretical versus practical. Because like if you go to a training class, they'll say, oh, you can name a symbol anything, or name a signal anything, and you can. But there might be reasons why you want to structure your naming so that when you go to debug it later, you can kind of correlate stuff together in a more meaningful fashion. You don't really understand why you would want to do that until you've gone through the whole process. So I think like being in the field and working on stuff regularly also helps me to bring that back to be able to teach it, rather than just kind of sitting in an isolated environment and playing around with stuff that's not really practical.
So we're getting close to our time limit. I'm going to close this with you, Rich. If you were to give these guys some advice and kind of guide them as to what you think the industry needed, what would you offer?
I mean, first off, it's stick to your guns with what you're doing. I mean, what this is how associations are formed. This is how we go from being kind of guys getting a band together and actually building something that brings us together. I mean, CEDIA 27 odd years ago was basically guys getting together and saying, there's got to be a better way. We've got to help one another as an industry. So first off, I'd say just keep doing what you're doing. I mean, I'm very appreciative of that. I think the biggest part though is we have to embrace the fact that our group is getting older, and so now you guys get the ability to carry on that mantle and looking towards the industry as a whole, and how are you going to give back? Like you said, you had mentorship opportunities. It was always, what was it? Reach one, teach one. And I think that's staying with that focus. And, we have the technology to promote one another now. And so, it's not always easy when you're doing it out of really the goodness of your heart in this case. And so it's easy to get discouraged. And so I think the first part is remember that it is appreciated. It doesn't always feel that way. And it's a whole lot easier to criticize what somebody's doing than to actually do it. And so just kind of stick to your guns in that respect. And so I'll be happy to promote the heck out of you. It's you've got the Uncle Richie stamp of approval.
Thanks, Rich.
Sometimes that's all you need. Well, that'll do it for today for our episode of the State of Control. I think it's been a great conversation, and as I said in recent episodes, these are all some topics that require follow-up and continued discussion. So please leave some comments and reach out if you guys want to hear more about it, and we'll continue the discussion. But I'd like to thank our guests today, and I'd also like to give them an opportunity to promote the work that they're doing. First, Pat Murray from Control House, thanks for being here, and why don't you share a little bit about how the listeners and viewers can find out more about what you're doing.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, if you go to learnavprogramming.com/a state of control, I'll get a few goodies up there for the show listeners. Some code that you can download and have some fun with. Learnavprogramming.com/a state of control, one word.
Thank you. And how can they find you or learn more about your company otherwise?
Yeah, just Google Control, H-A-U-S, Control House.
Excellent.
I take up the whole first page.
Next, thanks for being here, Dustin. Dustin Berg from Pro AV School and Dynamark. How can people find you, learn more about what you're doing, and get in touch?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. That course that I talked about, the Crestron Basics Bootcamp, kind of built for people that have maybe gone to level 1, maybe level 2, and need a bit of a refresher or a bit more information on how to kind of program. If you go to proavschool.com/state of control, I'm going to put a special offer to get into that course for you guys.
Just to clarify, is that going to be a state of control or just state of control?
State of control, easier to type.
Okay.
I'm gonna forward both of them.
It's a good idea.
Very cool. Thank you both. I'm sure the listeners and viewers will appreciate that. And last but not least, Uncle Richie, glad to have you back. I know that you're fighting off a sickness, but we're glad you hung in there with us.
Anytime. Happy to be here. It's always a good time.
So for those who don't know, how can they reach you, find you, and get in touch?
Easiest way is fregosadesign.com. You can find me on Twitter. Actually, Twitter's probably the easiest way, at rfregosa, fregosadesign.com. Or you can just type my name into the Googles, and I tend to crop up there quite a bit. So anyway, like I said, any way to reach one, teach one.
I think that we might have a title for the show.
Nice one.
So my name is Steve Greenblatt. You can reach me at my company website, controlconcepts.net, or at Steve Greenblatt on social media. But most importantly, come visit our website, leave a comment, let us know what you're looking to hear, let us know what you think of the show. Go to AVNation.tv and look at the State of Control page. And while you're on the site, check out our underwriters. Those are the people who help us to make these things happen and support our efforts. So also check out other shows, the weekly shows as well as the monthly shows. Connected is a great show, and also the AVIT show. I think that those are both some content that this audience would definitely be able to appreciate and learn from. But that'll be it for today for State of Control. Thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing, and we'll see you soon.